Senator Wicker for the opportunity to chair this important hearing. My name is Jake Ellsey. I'm the congressman from the 6th Congressional District of Texas, just south of Dallas. Before turning our attention to China and Europe, I want to highlight the greatest current threat to the region that most of us agree on, Russia. As we mark the 4th year of Russia's genocidal war on Ukraine, I have tremendous admiration for Ukrainians who have held the line against formidable odds. The bravery of Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the front line for years on end without respite, neighbors helping each other keep warm through this brutal winter, and children studying in metro stations as air raid sirens blare inspire us all and fueled Western solidarity and support. Putin and Western intelligence said the invasion would be over in hours, but the spirit of Ukrainians proved them all wrong. While there's always room to do more, I'm proud to say that the West has stood by Ukraine and strengthened our collective deterrence against Russia. This includes NATO nations increasing their spending on defense. We've all come to understand the threat posed by war criminal number one, Vladimir Putin, and his band of mobsters. However, through this ordeal, many of our allies in Europe have been slow to recognize that Russia's patron, China, is angling to become the true winner in this war. Xi Jinping has complemented Putin's brute force with a patient, persistent approach to establishing his global dominance and upending the U.S.-led world order. China has shrewdly used Russia's invasion, along with a suite of overt and covert tools, to assert itself in Europe and establish beachheads to manipulate the continent. A commitment to transatlantic security requires attention from both the threat of Russia's war as well as persistent threat posed by China's pursuit of hegemony. In a few minutes, I'll turn it over to our panelists, who will discuss how China is executing its strategy to supplant U.S. leadership and European independence, and the implications of failing to respond effectively. But first, I want to spend a few moments discussing why Americans and Europeans should care about China's growing influence. For our partners in Europe who lack a sufficient industrial base or developed tech sector, China's no-strings-attached offers of investment and trade seem enticing. And as Europeans spend significant resources bolstering Ukraine and grow their own militaries, many don't seem to see the harm in allowing China's cash to boost other key sectors. That cash comes with a catch. With Russia on the march, some believe that they don't have the resources or political capital to focus on the harmful elements of China's presence in their countries. This is a false choice. China and Russia share a vision for the world where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. But the free markets and democracies in the West are strategic obstacles to them. We embrace free speech, whereas free speech challenges in China's industrial base, as concerned citizens on both sides of the Atlantic demand publicly that China stop using Uyghur forced labor. We uphold a commitment to freedom of religion. That freedom compels people of faith to cry out and demand accountability when China arrests pastors and destroys churches that refuse to glorify the CCP. We depend on journalists to bring facts to light. These journalists threaten China's Belt and Road Initiative as they reveal a clear trend. Chinese firms make big promises of massive infrastructure development, but they deliver half-built ports and train stations that collapse on commuters. They build junk. And the innovation and progress delivered by our market economies provide unwanted competition for China's command economy, which operates at the whims of central planners and CCP cadres. Xi's approach to Europe includes concerted, systematic efforts to undermine the rights and ideals that are the bedrock of the transatlantic relationship. China's efforts to silence dissenters, threaten diaspora communities, violate citizens' privacy, and steal intellectual property have a dual purpose: bolstering China's image and power while eroding the values and institutions that set democracies apart. If our allies in Europe wish to see the next century characterized by the same freedom and prosperity that we've enjoyed for the last 80 years, we ought to take the threat posed by China deadly seriously. We must marshal our arsenals, our cyber capabilities, and our economic might to harden our countries against an insidious force that seeks to marginalize us. We hope that all of Europe rejects China's sinister overtures and follows the example set by our friends in Ukraine and the Baltics, who recognize that there is no price too high to pay for liberty and independence. It is time to recommit to the wisdom of our founders, Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. To discuss the troubling effects of China's increasing infiltration in Europe and how our European allies and the rest of the democratic world can best respond, I'm pleased to introduce our distinguished panel. Vidmantas Verbikas, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Lithuania. I've been to Lithuania twice in the last couple of years. I love your country. My wife wants to move there tomorrow. Audrey Wong, non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and Valbona Zanelli, non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. It's a privilege to have all three experts here today. Thank you to each of you for your investment in time. And Dr. Wong, we'll begin with you.
Representative Elzy and the Helsinki Commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. So I'll just take the next few minutes to outline 5 key takeaways about China's influence in Europe. So first, what are China's strategic goals in the European continent? One is to bolster friends and silence critics of the Chinese Communist Party and its policies, especially on politically sensitive issues such as human rights, abuse of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, ongoing territorial disputes, and of course to minimize opposition to Chinese claims over Taiwan. And second is to undermine transatlantic cooperation and European unity through a divide and conquer strategy. So even just peeling off a few dissenters can disrupt the formation of a durable coalition to counter a malign Chinese influence. Second, China adopts a multifaceted, multi-layered approach to exerting influence. It uses both coercion and inducements, so weaponizing supply chains, for example, while dangling promises of further economic benefits. China employs a mix of subversive and legitimate approaches. So Beijing often seeks to buy support through corrupt investments, through bribery, through other covert influence tactics. But it also readily uses elite co-optation, building and cultivating relationships with a variety of stakeholders and interest groups in democratic societies to try to persuade them of the validity of China's interests and policies. It also attempts to influence a wide array of targets. So we see activities across sort of diplomatic and government realms, business realms, public realms, right, and sort of intersecting tactics, combining economic, information, propaganda. And China is quite opportunistic at forging alliances of convenience, right? So aligning, trying to empower certain voices across the political and ideological spectrum, right, to get them to echo China's talking points, whether for transactional or ideological reasons. Third, China's economic statecraft may be imperfect, but it works well enough. Right? What China has done best is to really create divisions, to drive wedges within Europe, right, among European countries, as well as between Europe and the United States, right? So you have, countries who receive a lot of Chinese investment, who hope to receive more Chinese investment, right? Taking stances in line with China, vetoing EU statements critical of China, for example, and really co-opting and adopting Beijing's political rhetoric. Right, so individual countries often fear targeted economic retaliation from Beijing, and this limits progress, right, at the EU level when the European Commission, for example, seeks to introduce more stringent regulations that makes it harder to achieve. And of course, there's plenty of scrutiny and pushback against poorly conceived Chinese projects and other forms of illicit influence, right, thanks to the relative strength of institutions in many European nations. But the attractiveness of China's market and its capital could be enough to buy silence on issues that China really cares about. And in addition, China really strategically alternates the uses of economic inducements to buffer its periodic use of economic coercion, right? So we've seen examples of, sanction imposed on European elected officials on countries such as Lithuania, but then subsequently they like to renormalize these trade and investment flows and offer diplomatic reassurance. And so these promises and this cycle keeps governments and companies coming back, and hoping for more rather than actually concertedly diversifying away from China. And so this combination of carrots and sticks, really helps to minimize opposition to China, to stymie broader coalition building against China, and this creates more strategic space for Beijing to pursue its interests with relative impunity. Fourth point I want to make is that China often has a first mover advantage. There is relatively low, I think, especially compared to United States, elite and public literacy on China, right? Because Russia has often been the foremost unconventional threat. And so this really allows Beijing to fill the information gap, to dominate and propagate its strategic narratives, and really shape perceptions and understandings of Beijing's interests, right? And this logic applies when CCP-linked actors reach out to local officials who are more likely to be concerned with economic development. And China often likes to combine very assertive and aggressive propaganda messaging and public diplomacy to claim credit and sometimes exaggerate the importance of China as an economic partner, right? So you have a bridge, constructed by a Chinese company in Croatia, right, that was actually funded primarily by the European Union, but most people think it's funded and built by China. And the fifth point I want to make is that democratic backsliding, corruption, and patronage politics really provides weak entry points for Chinese influence and authoritarian influence in general. And we see, the intersection of sort of Chinese and Russian activities, where the lack of transparency and oversight really makes it easier for strongman politicians to accept corrupt investment deals in exchange for falling in line with Beijing's policies. And these activities, in turn, perpetuate a vicious cycle of autocratization, right, entrenching these illiberal leaders and really undermining good governance. At the same time, right, so it's the CCP engages in these illegal interference tactics, in espionage and all of that. But it's also quite adept at exploiting the openness of democratic societies, working within existing institutions and processes, exploiting these vulnerabilities to forge links with multiple stakeholders and really shape discourse in favor of China and create an impression of broader support for Chinese interests. And so this sort of broader, phenomenon of co-optation, I think, has been quite key in shaping how many elected officials and business leaders can operate in this realm, right? And so many of these influence activities are managed under the umbrella of the United Front, which is a diffuse and amorphous global network of official, quasi-official, and grassroots organizations that are tasked with mobilizing friends, suppressing enemies of the Chinese states. And CCP foreign influence tactics have really included, using political fixers, power brokers to gain access to government officials, tasking aides to spy on behalf of China, and even tapping on pro-China individuals to seek elected office. And so to conclude, I think, without overstating the extent of China's influence, I think the scale of resources that the party is able to allocate to its foreign policy goals means that it can make a dizzying multitude of influence attempts and play a waiting game to see which ones pay off. So this is not just a national security threat, but also corrodes the legitimate functioning of free and open societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Now, Vobona Zanelli, who is not with the American Enterprise Institute, she's with the Atlantic Council. Welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. Representative Alzi, distinguished members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important topic. Let me begin with one central point. The European Union has made significant progress in recalibrating the approach to the People's Republic of China. However, it is critically important to remind ourselves that Europe's China policy is not a single strategy, but it's a product of a complex negotiation between European Union institutions and 27 member states, each with distinct economic interests, political pressures, and security concerns. This reality makes unified and consistent action towards Beijing very difficult. China has expanded its economic footprint across Europe with a clear strategic purpose: to acquire advanced technologies, shape global value chains, and build leverage in critical sectors. Beijing combines state-backed financing, industrial subsidies, and political engagement to deepen its presence, targeting advanced manufacturing in Western Europe, infrastructure and energy in Southern Europe, political economic relationship in Central and Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans through platforms like 14+1 and the Belt and Road Initiative. For Beijing, this is not simply commercial gain. This is strategic leverage. It seeks to build dependency and expand its influence in critical sectors by exploiting Europe's openness and its regulatory complexity. This has structural implications for Europe. First, the EU's economic security is affected. The economic balance has shifted sharply over the last 2 decades. Now, China's share of the global economy is around 20%, has risen, while the European Union's has fallen to 14%. Trade has expanded, but has become increasingly imbalanced, with China supplying over 1/5 of EU imports and a trade deficit exceeding $400 billion. State subsidies, overcapacity, market access restriction, and export controls, especially in rare earths and critical inputs, have created vulnerabilities in European supply chains, triggering a China shock. Second, technology has become the sharpest area of competition. Europe's reliance on Chinese semiconductors, 5G, AI, and raw materials creates strategic dependencies, while Beijing expands its leverage through standards, subsidies, and embedded tech ecosystems. Third, defense and military security are indirectly but materially affected. Economic leverage creates constraints in decisions, complicates sanctions, and weakens supply chains. And those are risks that are heightened by China's alignment with Russia and its support for Moscow's war in Ukraine. In response, the European Union has shifted its posture, now has shifted from engagement to cautious competition with China. Trends like China's growing assertiveness, human rights issues, COVID-19 supply chain disruptions, and China's alignment with Russia have created shared concerns across Europe. In 2019, the EU defined China simultaneously as a cooperation partner, an economic competitor, and a systemic rival. Since then, the EU has adopted different mechanisms, from investment screening mechanism, anti-coercion instruments, international public procurement instruments, 5G security toolbox, Critical Raw Materials Act, Digital Services Act, and the Artificial Intelligence Act. So the EU de-risking is to reduce strategic vulnerabilities without severing economic ties. However, three structural challenges remain. First, EU institutional fragmentation. Authority over trade, technology, foreign policy, and security is divided among EU institutions, Commission, Council, and Parliament, and the 27 member states. This often produces slow decisions, overlapping responsibilities, and uneven implementation. Second, divergent national interest. Larger economies must balance commercial ties with security concerns. Some Central European countries continue to seek Chinese investment. Nordic and Baltic countries often prioritize security and human rights. So achieving consensus across these different perspectives is difficult. Third, domestic political pressures. Governments must reconcile political business interests and those that are seeking market access with security communities that are warning about dependencies. This produces policy inconsistencies even within single member states. To be effective, policy responses must operate both at national and multinational levels. China's assertiveness, coercion, lack of reciprocity, and alignment with Russia has drawn Europe and the United States closer, reinforcing the need for transatlantic unity despite the differences. The key question is how to implement it. So, three recommendations. First, the United States and the European Union should establish a high-level coordination mechanism to counter China and promote shared economic security. This should include joint initiatives like critical minerals, chip manufacturing, aligned inbound and outbound investment screening, and shared threat assessment. Second, technology alignment is urgent. Cooperation on export controls, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and dual-use goods must be sustained and enforcement-focused. American technological leadership and European regulatory power are complementary strengths, but differences over industrial policy and strategic autonomy must be bridged. Third, security cooperation should expand to address China-enabled support for Russia, strengthen counter-espionage and cyber defenses, and align Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific strategies where interests intersect. If effectively aligned, the combined scale of the US and EU economies can shape global standards, reinforce supply chains, and counter economic coercion. This will not come from expecting Europe to act as a federal superstate, but from sustained cooperation that combines American economic and military power with Europe's regulatory authority and market scale. In closing, China's rise is a defining geopolitical challenge of this century. Meeting it requires strategic clarity, institutionalized cooperation, and a shared commitment to preserving an open, yet secure rules and values-based international order. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And Minister Verbitskas, over to you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Representative LZ, distinguished members of Helsinki Commission. It is a profound honor for me today as a representative of Lithuania to address the United States Congress here. We are deeply grateful for America's steadfast partnership, principle, leadership, and enduring commitment to the securing and freedom of Lithuania and our region. Today in my remarks I will focus on key elements of Lithuania's experience with China's coercion. For Lithuania, economic security is not theoretical, it's shaped by lived experience. When we restored our independence in 1990, the Soviet Union responded with a full economic blockade. Cutting trade, cutting energy supplies, and that experience taught us a lasting lesson. Dependence creates vulnerabilities. Since then, we have deliberately reduced strategic dependencies. We built LNG infrastructure, diversified energy supply, and synchronized our grid with continental Europe. Today, 70% of our energy supplies comes from United States. For us, economic policy and national security are inseparable. Both must serve and protect our core democratic values and the freedom to make independent political choices without external coercion. This long-standing national approach to economic security informed Lithuania's decision in 2021. That year, Lithuania reassessed its economic engagement frameworks and withdrew from China's led 17+1 format. Lithuania also expanded economic and cultural engagement within its existing One China policy framework, including permitting the establishment of a Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius. In response, China imposed unprecedented economic and diplomatic coercion. First, bilateral trade was targeted. Lithuania as a country miraculously disappeared from China's customs systems. Export permits were delayed or denied. Contracts were not renewed. Then pressure escalated. Multinational companies were warned that using Lithuanian components could jeopardize their access to the Chinese market. The impact was immediate. In the first months, Lithuanian origin exports to China fell by 99.7%, essentially to zero. This was not a commercial dispute. It was a politically motivated pressure designed to change a sovereign policy decision. At the same time, China undertook unprecedented diplomatic measures. It unilaterally downgraded diplomatic relations without Lithuania's consent, creating a false appearance of mutual agreement. Our embassy staff were forced to surrender accreditation and leave Beijing. Lithuania does not recognize this downgrade, and we maintain our embassy. It continues to exist. Consular access to detained Lithuanian nationals in China has also been severely restricted, raising humanitarian and legal concerns. Lithuania's case illustrates a broader pattern of economic and diplomatic coercion used against democratic states whose sovereign decisions do not align with Beijing's preferences. Trade, supply chains, and diplomatic status were weaponized altogether. How did we respond? First, we acted through the European Union. European Commission initiated WTO dispute settlement proceedings, and we appreciate the United States stepping up as a third party in this. Our case accelerated adoption of a EU anti-coercion instrument, strengthening collective response mechanisms. Second, we intensified coordination with partners, especially the United States, in critical sectors such as semiconductors, photonics, biotechnology, and defense technologies. Third, we diversified rapidly. Lithuanian exporters oriented toward trusted markets. In subsequent years, namely last year, 89% of Lithuanian origin exports went to European Union, European Economic Area, OECD, NATO, and Indo-Pacific countries. By 2025, overall trade flows with China had recovered. The structure of our exports, though, has changed. But only 1.2% of exports are going to China, Belarus, and Russia. This adjustment was not accidental. Together with diversification, Lithuania strengthened its international resilience. Our investment screening system in place since 2001 was reinforced and expanded. It has enabled Lithuania to take concrete security decisions, including exclusion of high-risk vendors, such as Huawei, from our 5G infrastructure. Monitoring and mitigating strategic dependencies have become a permanent element of our economic policy. At the same time, we led international dialogue on economic coercion in OECD with partners like European Union, the United States, Japan, and other democracies to share experience and strengthen resilience. And today, Lithuania remains committed to working closely with the United States and other like-minded partners to strengthen resilient and transparent supply chains among democracies. And it's worth to mention here that Lithuania remains open to dialogue and restoring diplomatic representation with China. We believe that stable relations must be based on reciprocity, respect, and adherence to international conventions. Thank you so much. I'm looking for your questions.
Thank you, Vidmantas. Okay, well, we've been joined by a couple of our members, Senator Ruben Gallego, who is a senator from Arizona. His time is tight. He's a combat Marine who has also sacrificed, as I see so many people out here who understand what the price of freedom is, so does he. I'll leave it over to you.
All right, thank you, Chairman. Joe, good to see you again, sir. Good to be back here on this side. Thank you, Mr. Vidmantas. It's been great working with Lithuania and the other Baltic states on the Baltic Security Initiative, and proud to continue that work. You know, one of the things you hit upon is one of the things I did here on the House side was 5G coordination, and what happened with 5G is by the time Europe and to some degree the United States was slow to respond, and now we have a significant share of 5G infrastructure across the continent that still relies on Chinese vendors, despite the presence of European firms that we trust also in the United States, like Nokia. So I'm concerned that we might be repeating that same mistake when it comes to 6G. And Ms. Zanelli, I believe, if I said that correctly, and I apologize if I didn't, you brought up a very good point about trying to have coordinated action. And so I guess one of the things I'm trying to figure out is, like, how do we do that? Because the best way for us to stop the emergence of 6G Chinese dominance is for us to have standards, European standards, or just like free world standards, I would say, aligning with Japan, South Korea, so that we have market dominance, so that way we actually can find ourselves we could find our allied tech backings have market capability. So how does that look? How would that look like in your opinion? What can we do as countries to start doing that kind of coordination in terms of market policy, regulations, and things of that nature? Secondarily, one of the things we saw with 5G last time around was that we were able to convince, especially a lot of our NATO and European Union allies and other countries, near allies, but it was your emerging countries that were willing to take on the cheaper, subsidized Huawei versus our Western standards. So what can we do? Can we set up a separate fund that would help some of these developing countries to just avoid the money trap, the honey trap that China always engages in? And this question could be for really for all three here. But I do think that us making sure that we do not allow China to win the 6G war is going to be extremely important for us in terms of continuing to have democratic dominance in this world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Gallego. First of all, thank you for your service. I think I fully agree with your point, and I believe that at this time of really growing international tension and rapid disruptive technological change, I think strengthening transatlantic cooperation, but also with the partners in the Indo-Pacific, is essential, not only for security, but also for technological and economic competitiveness, and the ability, which is most important, of the democratic system to play a leading role in the global technological governance. It's about the future of technological governance. I think in this context, closer coordination between the public and the private sectors, not only between the governments on both sides of the Atlantic and with the Indo-Pacific partners, is increasingly important. So the goal, I believe, is to promote shared policy priorities, like you mentioned, and stronger partnerships, including moving towards maybe a more integrated transatlantic technological ecosystem. I could bring an example from Italy, where I am based now. There is a new law which is called Buy Transatlantic, and it's focused on enhancing actually resilience, growth, security in the years ahead, really looking at buying all the new technologies, focusing on countries, both European Union countries, but also the United States. Now, what to do with countries that do not have the resources maybe to buy and focus on buying cheaper energy? Like Representative Elsie mentioned, the no strings attached approach, actually, we believe it's a ropes attached approach for most of these countries. So I think to disincentivize risky tech partnerships like with Huawei in sensitive systems, governments need a mix of clear rules. They have to be national, but also European rules, economic incentives, and allied coordination. First, countries should exclude actually high-risk vendors from critical sectors, including government communications. We have seen in some cases even the government is using those risky technologies, lawful intercept system, and core infrastructure. Second, transatlantic partners should align export controls. I think it's important, and investment screening, so companies cannot exploit the gaps that exist within the European Union, but also within the transatlantic community. And then third, governments should offer incentives. They should offer financial and industrial alternatives, helping allies reducing those supply risky equipments and diversify supply chains. So the future is really more coordination in the transatlantic realm.
Do we have anyone else want to answer that? Yes, Mr.
If I'm allowed shortly, I just have to add something to a wonderful answer by Madam Zanelli. In Lithuania, we heard such discussions about cheaper versus secure. When we built up our LNG terminal in Klaipėda, we were criticized for excessive spendings, for very expensive equipment and decisions. And 12 years later, this project is economically feasible. It's the same like we postponed, Lithuania was in advancement, and it had to be the first country in Europe to introduce 5G network. And we were the last country to introduce 5G network. Because of that, we forbid Huawei to enter into the market because of economic security concerns and national security concerns. Right today, our ICT development and our local businesses who are working with 5G networks and looking for solutions, they are working and expanding. And Lithuania is the best advocate for transatlantic partnership and coordination here. So we really need to find a way to agree between the European Union and the United States to work together on those issues. Critical materials, energy mix, energy security, advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, SMRs, you name it. But we have to work together here. Thank you.
I apologize. I have to go pick up my daughter from daycare. That's the real important thing. But in terms of, I think the easier thing is the coordination. The harder thing is the funding, because we're dealing with a lot of countries that have budgets that are overrun. We're demanding our European partners to have, go up to 5% of GDP when it comes to their defense spending, which I'm not against either. So how do we create that international fund that's not going to necessarily benefit Western Europe, Europe in general? But what about when we're talking about countries like the Philippines or Africa or South America, where they are going to have to make these kind of trade decisions between, do I spend money here and try to stay good with our Western partners, or do I take the cheap option? I think that's something that we have to kind of think about kind of globally as partners. Thanks so much, guys. I'll see you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina, who is, you're going to have plenty of time, Joe. We've got another 45 minutes, but I'd like
just
to
one
say-
second. Hey,
Go ahead.
before the senator leaves, hey, Senator, I want to say something nice about you. Okay, this unheard
said-
of, okay? No, but hey.
I thought we weren't going to do that.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to commend Senator Galeo. He actually led a delegation to Kyiv in December 2021. And we, while we were there, we were meeting with the military officials as they were planning for resistance, for guerrilla warfare. The belief was that war criminal Putin would roll over the people of Ukraine. 4 years later, with the encouragement of good people, bipartisan, can you believe Republicans and Democrats working together? Indeed, working together, supporting the people of Ukraine, and of course Lithuania has been so strong in supporting the people of Ukraine. But over and over again, I just wanted to point out that we can have bipartisanship, and we do, and I appreciate Senator Galeo's service on behalf of the American people. And indeed, that was December of 2021, and the worst fears came forth on February 24, 2022, when war criminal Putin earlier in the month had met with President Xi Jinping in China. Together, the two dictators embraced, declaring, quote, no limits partnership, and then later, clearly authorized by Beijing, the war criminal Putin invaded Ukraine and launched a genocidal full-scale war with full confidence that China was going to be 100% behind it. Putting that in mind, personally, I have grown up with a great appreciation of the people of China. My father served in India and China during World War II in the Flying Tigers in the 14th Air Force. And so as I was growing up, I learned how hardworking the people of India and China are in my dad's service in Kunming, Chengdu, and Xi'an. And then sadly, 20 years ago, I actually met with President Jiang Zemin in the presidential compound in Beijing. And when I was introduced, Chairman Elsie, as a member of Congress, he yawned. And then somebody said, hey, Joe's the son of a flying tiger. He threw his arms up in the air and announced the American military is revered in China. Sadly, that's not where we are today. But indeed, Americans can be proud of what we did to liberate China, and our appreciation for the people of China, people of Taiwan, but understanding there is evil called the Chinese Communist Party. Since the full-scale invasion, cooperation between the Chinese Communist Party and Russia has deepened. China steals Western intellectual property, then provides Russia the technology it depends on to murder Ukrainian families, just as we see Khomeini has murdered Iranian families, and now he's gone. China keeps war criminal Putin on life support by purchasing Russian oil, coal, and natural gas. China is running interference for Russia and international organizations, ensuring that war criminal Putin and his army do not face accountability for their sickening treatment of the Ukrainians. China's patronage of Russia has also extended to destabilize and control Europe. While the CCP's vision for global dominance by 2049 is grander than the Kremlin, Xi Jinping still sees Russia spreading chaos and violence as useful in weakening Europe and making it more malleable to its vision. While Russian agents carry out arson attacks and assassinations, Chinese agents conduct corporate espionage and silent dissent by threatening and renditioning dissidents. War criminal Putin's shadow war in the United States and Europe is also for the Chinese Communist Party. The tactics each dictatorship used have been increasingly similar and more sophisticated, and disturbingly are aided by technology and innovation. This playbook has been in full display in the Republic of Georgia. Bidzina Izvashvili and his Georgian Dream dictatorship have jailed nearly every opposition leader, defied the Georgian people who want freedom and prosperity, not Chinese debt trap of diplomacy as Russian oligarchy. Russia has long been Bidzina's base of operations and source of wealth. Since the Georgian Dream seized power through fraudulent elections in 2024, it has been China providing them much of the surveillance technology, propaganda channels, and financial backing needed to address and oppress the will of the pro-American Georgian people. President Donald Trump has rightfully prioritized Central Asia, the Middle Corridor, to secure and diversify our supply chain. The Georgian Dream has essentially given over the Georgian infrastructure to the Chinese Communist Party and sold its country into debt slavery. American access to the Middle Corridor is essentially controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Dictators increase violent oppression when they are the weakest. War criminal Putin has sacrificed over 1 million Russians for roughly 1% of Ukrainian territory, as Ukrainians have been so successful in their efforts. Xi has purged nearly all top military officials. Europe accommodating manipulative trade policy and gray zone attacks will not stop them. Much weakness will only empower them to grow bolder with their aggression. Xi and war criminal Putin only understand the language of strength. I urge our European allies to look to lessons learned from past economic integration and appeasement of Russia. The unholy alliance between the Chinese Communist Party and war criminal Putin must be met with complete resolve. Lithuania is to be commended for its resolve on Taiwan, and we encourage them to continue their legacy of upholding the democratic values of maintaining the name of the Taiwan Representative Office. Indeed, Lithuania's appreciated for the support of legitimate President Svetlana Alexieva of Belarus and supporting the courageous people of Ukraine successfully defeating war criminal Putin. Western Europe could learn from our East European allies, and it is an extraordinary day. I just left the floor to recognize the elimination of the dictatorship in Tehran. And so with Khomeini being removed, that's the last really Russian ally in the Middle East, particularly if you add in that Assad, the dictator of Syria, has actually moved to Moscow. And now we have a government with President Ahmad al-Shara that is reaching out to work, and President Donald Trump is giving Syria a chance. And of course, another dictator gone is Maduro of Venezuela, and we can all hope and pray that one day Lukashenko of Belarus will join his fellow dictators relocating to Moscow. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let's talk about China-Russia cooperation real quick. And I'm going to address this to Audrey. China and Russia seem to be using similar gray zone tactics when attacking countries in Europe and Asia, including subsea cable cutting, influence and information manipulation campaigns, and airspace incursions. To what extent are China and Russia's militaries and political leadership directly collaborating on these type of attacks, or are they just copying each other?
Thank you, Representative Elsie, for the question. I think we certainly see a high degree of alignment in Chinese and Russian interests. So this is not to say that, they don't have their disagreements, and I think at times they are wary of each other. But by and large, I think China is aligned with Russia in wanting to see sort of destabilization and weakening of democratic, free and open societies, including the United States and the European Union. And one, Representative Elsie, you've outlined sort of a range of tactics that they've been using, and I think we see a lot of synchronization, especially in the strategic narratives that they're using on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And sort of amplifying, echoing a lot of disinformation that Russian state media has been propagating. I think we also see China sort of going beyond that, where not only is it sort of amplifying and spreading disinformation that is meant to sow discord and sort of expose the fissures and sort of vulnerabilities in democratic societies. I think China, in my work, I found that Chinese state media is actively sort of trying to push the message of what I call autocratic advantage, sort of highlighting the performance advantages of authoritarian regimes, not calling it autocracy per se, but sort of highlighting some of the benefits and advantages that having a strong man in power that centralization of power affords for the people of a country. And I think in my research I found that actually has significant impacts on how foreign publics globally think about democracy and the degree of support for democracy. So I think we see an intersection where China is sort of not only trying to shape in the views of China itself, but also, I think, fundamentally undermining, support for democracy and accelerating democratic backsliding.
Thank you, Audrey. Anybody else want to address that? Go ahead, Valbona.
Yes, sir. So I think that China and Russia are strange bedfellows. However, they have shared strategic alignment, and it's mainly to counter the opposition to the United States, in opposition to NATO, and that's very open in the narrative, where they repeat each other's narrative, but also to the liberal international order more in general. I think what the difference is between China and Russia is that Russia is a revisionist nuclear power seeking to undermine NATO and destroy destroy the current international order, while China, which is the primary long-term competitor also of the United States, aims to reshape, use the global institutions, and reshape and take advantage from those institutions. I think what's important, especially when it comes to the European Union perspective also on China, which is the topic also of conversation today, is that one of the main trends that has changed perceptions in Europe has been really the support that Beijing has given to Russia for its war in Ukraine, and that has raised awareness in the European Union about the security challenges. China, at the same time, is a competitor, a partner, but also systemic rival, and that part of the systemic rival has increased of its importance, especially with after the shattering of the security architecture of Europe after the invasion of Ukraine. The No Limits Partnership has strengthened that, but also the economic cooperation between the two countries, because they need each other in the current stage. The Chinese officials have been very open that they would not like Russia to go down, even in talks with members from the European Commission. So it is very, very clear. We just need to be eye-opened and not to really apply sometimes mirror imaging on things that we think do not make sense, because they are very openly stating the obvious. So just in the last 2 years, they have met more than 40 times, President Xi and President Putin. That should tell us something.
Sure does. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to yield time to Chairman Wilson for 5 minutes of questions. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, witnesses, thank you for being here today. It's just so refreshing to have each of you here, and I appreciate the leadership of Chairman Elsie today to keep things moving well. With that in mind, Ms. Zanelli, Italy has become a shining example of working in the European Union and NATO. You can correct me, but I believe the current Mangione government is the longest serving out of 67 since World War II. What an incredible tribute that is. And additionally, I have a personal interest. My number 2 son was a doctor in Naples in the U.S. Navy, and I've got 3 grandchildren who speak perfect Italian. So our relationship is so positive. With that in mind, that's not true with other countries, and it's so sad to me that the success of Italy with the EU and NATO, and then we have countries that are just weak, almost complicit. Hungary, it's just the country that should have inspired everyone from the 1956 revolution now is bowing down to the people who drove over patriots there in Hungary. And then Spain. Spain's decision last August to trust Huawei with sensitive information, including judicial wiretaps, has underscored the threat China still poses to a unified, secure, and resilient transatlantic tech policy. How can we continue to disincentivize such tech partnerships that threaten to create hardware or train vulnerability to be exploited by the Chinese Communist Party?
Thank you very much, Co-Chairman Wilson. In Italy, under Prime Minister Meloni, the government has recalibrated, actually, over the last 4 years, its China policy by exiting the Belt and Road Initiative, which has been, one of the perfect examples of showing that, and strengthening its alignment with the United States and the broader transatlantic community. And I emphasize that because based on our research, the Atlantic Council, where we look at the current trends and if the European Union is waking up to the China challenge, what we have found out is that countries that have closer relationships with the United States, they have been going closer to the EU perception and to the EU policy on China, which the European Commission has a very, very serious policy on China. But unfortunately, as I was explaining in my open remarks, there are so many differences inside Europe, and that makes EU policy very difficult. Some countries, such as Hungary, they have been the main recipients of foreign direct investment from China. In 20 2024, the majority of foreign direct investment that was arriving in the European Union actually went to Hungary, with some investment in factories of electric vehicles and other areas that have become really vulnerabilities also for a European market and the supply chains inside Europe. Going back to Italy, I will mention a couple of points that maybe should be a good example for other countries, what has happened in recent years. It's, of course, this blending of transatlantic loyalty with economic caution, because China is an important market also for Italy. I believe that should be also the guiding principle for other European countries. Rome has strengthened its golden power investment screening rules, so even going further, more deeper than the European Union investment screening rules, and has blocked or restricted acquisitions of strategic sectors, such as in areas such as semiconductors, robotics, and also telecommunications. It has adopted the buy transatlantic, which is the way to go also for other countries, procurement approach that prioritizes European Union member states and also American companies. But also the third element, which is clearly around democratic values, has raised concerns about human rights, and we do not see that, unfortunately, throughout the European Union, and that is why it's so difficult to have a united policy in the European Union when it comes to China, because of the diverging interest and also because of diverging interest of the economic community in the European Union.
And indeed, follow the money. That's so sad. I don't know many people who are aware of the level of Chinese Communist Party investment with the government in Hungary. Again, the last government that should be, because they were the first to stand up to Soviet imperialism. With that, I yield back and be happy to any other questions later.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple more minutes. Keep going. It's just the two of us. Let's have a conversation here. This is good stuff. You're on a roll.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, thank you. See what a good chairman he is. This is amazing. People from Texas are very bright. Indeed, Mr. Verbitskas, an example of success are the Baltic republics. Americans should know that in 1940, when the Red Army occupied the Baltic republics, the United States never recognized the occupation. We never recognized that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were happy Soviet republics. They were not happy, and they weren't Soviet republics. They were independent countries. And then once you achieve your freedom in 89 and 90, it's exciting that the three countries have just blossomed. And what a contrast to the Russian Federation. And then equally significant, we learned recently, Jake and I, that the economies of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania with Poland is 1.5 times that of the size of the Russian Federation, and growing much quicker. And so what an example for the people of Russia. They can do better looking across the Narva River and do better as the Baltic republics. With that in mind, which EU members have, from your point of view, been the greatest allies in responding to China's economic coercion? What are the greatest challenges that Lithuania's had in working with EU cooperation to face the challenge of the Chinese Communist Party?
Thank you, Honorable Congressman, for your kind words, and really appreciate all the United States efforts and Wellness Sumner Declaration and non-recognition of Lithuania's and Baltic's occupation. I got a chance to serve at the consulate in Chicago, so we have on our wall the old sign of a Lithuanian consulate from pre-war period, and we appreciate that, and to having our diplomatic missions, which never ceased to work during the occupation period. So this is a very, very cherishable moment for us. Thank you for your question, and here, listening to what my colleague said about European Union, we just have to remember that if economic coercion for Lithuania, as I mentioned in my statement, we saw it from the very, very beginning. In European Union, economic security strategy was adopted in year 2023 in June, with first steps of implementation next year. So we can say that the understanding on strategic rivalship with China is in European Union, but as you rightly stated, that cone has a lot of angles. So internal businesses, domestic investment, what was made of? Now, when we withdraw from 17+1 Road and Belt Initiative, we met a lot of non-understanding from our partners, what we're doing, why we're doing, because it's easy money, as you told, follow the money. We had that Klaipėda Sea State Port, which China wanted to take over, and incentives were on the table on big amounts. But coming back, what do we see? There is a lot of more understanding within the European Union. Renewed FDI screening mechanism, which will be enforced from January 1st next year. Dual-use export control mechanism. Unbound investment control, which none of those countries are keen to see in, but we even see our like-minded partners within the states and economies, like Netherlands, for instance, who understood that this is a threat. This is a threat to lose their comparative advantages. So I won't be naming countries in here because we are 27 in the same pool. We better work together. We better work together, find a ways to understand each other, as well, even when we're talking about Hungary, right? So what is happening, why is happening, and we better do that. And I will repeat transatlantic cooperation, mentioned not once here at our table. Again, this we would consider as utmost importance, to have that mutual common understanding, to work together on our strategic rivals, softly speaking, and to find that connection, and not to be afraid of that cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to point out, as you mentioned about the legation in Chicago, I'm sure that it's a reaffirmation of the warm relationship we have between Lithuania and the United States, and I'm sure that the second largest Lithuanian city after Vilnius is Chicago. The second largest Polish city in the world is Chicago. The second largest Bulgarian city in the world is Chicago, and so we all come together, and of course, I'm celebrating Bulgaria National Day yesterday, so hey, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. I'd like to take a little time here because Audrey's got a stop clock, and I've seen you writing furiously. I don't have a question for you. What is it you want to say over the next couple of minutes? Because you're the expert in here. I can ask all the questions I want, but you've got some thoughts on your mind, so go ahead and give us what they are.
Sure. Well, actually, it was sort of in response to Chairman Wilson's, question and comment about, which countries have been most susceptible to Chinese influence, and which countries best respond. And I sort of think, taking a step back, I think, it highlights the importance of strengthening democratic resilience and ensuring that institutions are strong, that there are checks and balances in, all of these societies and these countries, right, to ensure that there is transparency, awareness of what China is doing, that there are enough, stakeholders that are able to push back, right, and not just let a dictator or a strongman politician sort of be able to accept, corrupt deals and do what he wants with it. So I think, in terms of looking forward, right, I think, and sort of looking at each individual country and trying to ensure that civil society, that there is free and fair elections, all of these attributes, I think, are key in allowing individual countries to be able to push back against Chinese influence more broadly.
Thank you. Okay, since you've just got a few more minutes, and my friend Mark Vesey from Texas, my neighbor to the west and north, and he surrounds me, and I'd like to welcome him to the to the hearing today. So Mark, Audrey's got until 3:45.
Okay.
So if you got some questions for her, go ahead and ask them, and you have some time.
Oh, will, and anybody can answer them. I wanted to ask, particularly as it relates to the supply chain issues that we've talked about related to Greenland. What sort of steps can the EU take to prevent China from gaining leverage through infrastructure investment or resource access when it comes to the issue around Greenland and the critical mineral supply chains, which China already dominates those supply chains? That's something that I'm really concerned about.
I think some of my colleagues will have good answers to that,
Yeah.
but I'll take a first shot. I think you raised, it's a very serious problem and question. I think, what we've been talking about, sort of the importance of coordination and sort of combining, allies in Europe with allies in the Indo-Pacific. So sort of thinking about Japan and South Korea and sort of improving that coordination to ensure that, there is sort of vertical integration of these supply chains, that at each step we're not dependent on China for mining and extraction, for processing, for the technologies that are required, right, to transform these rare earth and critical minerals into the strategic inputs for technology and other important sectors. So I think ensuring that there is strategic coordination at the high levels, but I think also putting your money where your mouth is, right?
Yeah.
That you're saying, here are maybe, some funds at sort of everyone pitching in and saying, here's how we can support, companies to invest in the whole supply chain. So not just, mining, but also the technologies to refine and process rare earths. I think it's critical to diversify and de-risk and, ensure that we're not dependent on China for at any stage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Mrs. Anelli, I want to ask you, when President Trump and his efforts to want to, or I'll say initially, I guess he's kind of walked back a little bit, his efforts to want to have more of an influence in Greenland, has that helped or hurt Chinese influence in Greenland?
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Weasley. I would like to go a little bit back into the leverage that the Chinese have, especially when it comes to Europe, because Europe depends 97% on Chinese rare earth and critical inputs for its technologies. And it's a double-edged sword also for the fact that all those that are needed for more spending, more development in defense and technologies for the European Union, they're dependent on the Chinese. So that's why we have this dependence and leverage that the Europeans have on China. However, Europe has reacted. It has a critical mineral act recently, and so it has a new procurement strategy that the European companies will get together and also work together towards those issues. When it comes to the collaboration with the United States, I would like to point out a very important thing that happened a couple of weeks ago, which was the Critical Mineral Summit that took place in Washington, D.C., with participation of many European Union members, but also allies from Indo-Pacific. And right after that, there was also an action plan that was signed between the United States, the European Union, and Japan to work together on those critical minerals. When it comes to Greenland, I would like to say that really what is important, if we want to focus and really counter the Chinese influence in the world, it's transatlantic cooperation in all areas, not only when it comes to China, but also when it comes to trade between the United States and European Union, when it comes to political alignment. So all those issues are critical. That is the best thing that we can do, to strengthen our cooperation, work together, and understand that the transatlantic economy is bound by foreign direct investment, not so much trade. 1.2 trillion is the trade between the United States and Europe, and it dwarfs any trade relations with China or other partners, but it's 7.2 trillion of foreign direct investment that support jobs on both sides of the Atlantic, 15 million jobs that are supported. So that is what we should not overlook. the importance of transatlantic trade, but also what bonds us together, which is values and the values-based and rules-based international order. So working together, I think it's the best way to also counter Chinese influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that somebody has to go. Jake, I think who has to go? Does someone have to leave?
Audrey has to leave. I guess she has a hard stop at 3:40. We were told you had a hard stop. If you don't, that's fine.
Oh, okay, and this has been my last one, what I very quickly wanted to ask is, what are EU countries looking at as it relates to America and China, as it relates to like Taiwan and Vietnam and other countries in the Pacific, and just watching that retrenchment and watching that relationship and watching everything unfold? What do you think that EU countries are watching to see how America handles that situation that is much closer to China, obviously from a geographical standpoint?
Your question said what lessons are
Well, what do you think that the EU countries are watching? Like, do you think that they're saying, okay, because obviously, for instance, if we were to move further away from Taiwan, for instance, right, or Japan, and they were left to have to defend themselves, or even from a non-defense standpoint when it comes to trade, and if China becomes the predominant trade partner to some of the countries that we have had historically closer relationships with, what do you think EU countries are looking at to see how all of that sort of unfolds with China, particularly with those countries being closer neighbors to China?
Yeah, so I think there would, in that unfortunate scenario, right, I think there would be a bandwagoning effect, right? It's sort of saying if the United States is not going to support Taiwan, if it's retrenching from support for its longstanding alliance relationships in Japan and Korea and the Philippines, right? And given that, in the past, right, the United States has articulated that Asia as important and Indo-Pacific is an important strategic region for Washington and for U.S. interests, I think it would send a very strong signal of a sort of uncertainty, right, of U.S. unreliability. And I think that has unfortunately been a very common theme or fear, right, that has inhibited, I think, has affected U.S. reputation, and I think makes countries, they may not like China, but they feel, oh, we have no alternative because China is providing the investments or China is the important trading partner. So I think security retrenchment accompanied by already relatively weak U.S. economic strategy in the Pacific, right, I think will have, broad ramifications for perceptions of the U.S. as a reliable and global leader.
Yeah. Thank you.
Keep going, man.
No, not right now.
Okay. Well, recent reporting suggests that China has stepped up espionage efforts in high-tech firms and academic research centers focused on critical emerging industries like AI. What steps should governments, companies, and universities be taking to protect intellectual property? Valbona?
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, not much is being, there are things that are being developed in Europe, but this has been an area where we have not seen big policies also coming from the European Union. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now in Europe is that if until 5 years ago, we mainly saw state-owned companies, Chinese state-owned companies investing in the European Union, now we're seeing more private companies with smaller investment that's not going into the screening mechanism. So that is what is very important. Right now, there are some governments like the Lithuanian and some others that are looking deeper into that area, looking at research and development institutes, looking at the Confucius Institute. But this is, unfortunately, until now, this is not wide European, so we do not have those standards that also countries can reach out and understand and implement those into their own policies. But as I was mentioning at the beginning, this is the most important area of future competition, the tech competition. That's why we need to protect our technologies. That does not mean that Europe and the United States should not be open, because that is our biggest strength that we have. However, we should protect and be safe from thefting and from theft and from spillover of those technologies towards our adversaries.
Vidmantas?
So, if I may, I will back a little bit to the question
Go
by
ahead.
Honorable Wiese. To combine this one, what Europe does here. Europe, we think, is waking up finally, a little bit. Not so quick we want to, as Lithuania, when we are talking about, but let's see. Free trade agreement with Mercosur, negotiated more than 25 years. Free trade agreement with India, Indo-Pacific strategy, free trade agreement with United Arab Emirates. So Europe is looking for diversification in all spheres. And we do understand that those goods who are not entering United States market from China, they are trying now overflood European market. And this is the threat in all senses, as for consumers as well as for businesses and producers, and for technologies. Now, this year, my colleague, he participated at New Delhi at Artificial Intelligence Summit in India. A lot of European representations this year. 2 years ago, it was almost non-existent. So we are cheering and talking about transatlantic cooperation, but also there is that need to have the diversification of businesses, diversification of technological cooperation. Because, yes, of course, there are several technologies, emerging technologies, which China now is dominating, 19 out of 24. This is not good. We need to be back a little bit here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey. You got one more? Go ahead. Then I'll make a closing statement as we're wrapping up on our time.
The one thing that I did want to ask, I know you said that Europe is waking up. If Europe feels like that they need to have more of a trade policy or trade agreement with China to fill some of the gaps that may be left from the U.S. not being able to fill those needs for whatever reason anymore, do you think that there are enough safeguards in place? Like, for instance, there's been a lot of talk about a few years ago, I can't remember if it was Airbus or if it was Boeing, but there was like an entire plane that was basically, stolen, that the Chinese replicated for their own use to try to break up the duopoly between Airbus and Boeing. Do you think that there's enough that European countries also, if they want to go into these newer agreements, that they are putting enough safeguards up to protect their countries from Chinese being able to spy on their proprietary entities that they have? And either one of you can answer.
I just shortly can repeat what I've said earlier about European Union introducing economic security policy in 2023. Mm-hmm. So just 3 years ago, we've started to do things we have been doing a long way ago, like Lithuania and foreign direct investment screening since 2001.
Do you think you can do all of that, though, and still have a robust trading partnership with China, is what I'm trying to get at?
Robust trade partnership with China doesn't exist.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So...
Well, Honorable, I'd like to say that, repeat here, that the EU has come a long way when it comes to recognizing, what China is doing, also seeing China as a competitor to and a rival. I would like to remind everyone that back in 2012, when the 16+1 was established, there was even optimistic view from the European Union because it was seen as a way to pump more money, more investment in a Europe that was suffering from the financial economic crisis. And that was when the opening also for the Chinese big companies was created in Europe after the crisis. Investment from China went from less than $1 billion a year to $40 billion a year in 2016. So that was when the opening also was created for the Chinese companies that invested in Central Eastern Europe, but also in Southern Europe. So that is the first point. The European Union has come a long way. For the very first time, I would like to repeat that the European Union is linking economics with national security, which was not part of the European vocabulary. However, there are divisions inside the European Union. Even the fact that you cannot put really in one sentence, but though it's pragmatic, partner, competitor, and rival, but that really shows that inside the European Union for 27 member states, there is something for everyone. I'd also like to remind that while this tripact was published by the European Commission in 2019, the European Council only adopted that 4 years later after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So that raised awareness on challenges from China. So on trade, I would like to say that in the last year only, trade disbalance has increased of more than $100 billion between the European Union and China. So it is creating issues and suffering for European companies. And so that is the main issue, I believe, now that Europe and China have to sit and really look at, how this overcapacity that is pushed because of the internal problems inside the Chinese economy is then deployed to the European Union.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, in the last few minutes, I'd like to just close with a couple of thoughts. And number one is the elephant in the room right now is there's a conflict going on with Iran. And I'm trying to soak up everything I can in the news right now, like everybody else is, about what's going on, what's the end state, what is our goal. And I saw an article from my other favorite group of people from the Hudson Institute. Zineb Rabua wrote, "The Iran strike is all about China." And it's a remarkable article. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please do. But there's a theme, and we are at the point now where it's become understood by our friends across the world, those who cherish freedom, those who value the freedoms that they've gained in many cases just 30 years ago, just under a generation ago, that none of these four countries of Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea are operating in a silo. So when we talk about Russia and in the Middle East, or China in the Middle East, it's not or, it's and. They're all working together. You have the former Ayatollah, may he rot in hell. Genocide of the Jews, genocide of his own people, 40,000 dead just a few weeks ago. Genocide. Vladimir Putin, genocide of Ukrainians. Genocide of Ukrainians. Not right. He sits at the end of the table because he knows what's awaiting him down the road. Kim Jong-un, murdering his own people, starving his own people. Up to 50 warheads. Giving his own daughter the remote control for missile launches. Not right in the head. Xi Jinping, genocide of the Uyghurs. Purging of his top staff. A cult of personality, they're all working together just like they were back in 1938, 1940. You could argue, based on what your understanding of warfare is, are we already in it? Is it already number 3? Because of the economic warfare, the intellectual property theft. I leave that up to somebody else to discuss. But I do like the direction that we're going now as a nation, as a world of free nations, slowly getting back together. It's democracies and freedom-loving people like to avoid the idea that there's evil in the world, but you can't ignore it. And it never goes away. It didn't end after World War I, it didn't end after World War II, and it still exists. And unless it's stomped on and put out of its misery, it never actually goes away because it's an idea. And with China, my view of all of this is discussion of China and Russia and these other countries. Those other nations are the imperial guard for China. China is sitting on the throne of swords back behind just waiting. And these are vassal states that it is using and employing in dastardly ways to take complete control of the world. You know, the dollar is the reserve currency of the free world, of the entire world. That's not what China wants. This is about power and economic power. It's not going to be the ruble. It's not going to be the real. And it's not going to be the North Korean won. They want it to be the yuan. This is a godless, sinister government that has no moral compass and is willing to take lives for power. We need to recognize that as an international community. The UN needs to get over being feckless. They need to understand what exactly is at stake. And as I look out into this room, and as somebody who has to shake hands for a living and meet people and understand what is going on in their lives, every time I come to a Helsinki Commission meeting, I look at the people in the crowd. Number one, they're always youthful. Number two, I know that they're 1 degree away from knowing somebody or they themselves have witnessed what it's like under tyrannical governments. And I notice that when I look out into the crowd, they are looking at me as if they want me to look at them and understand and look into their eyes. The fear they feel from what these tyrannical governments are capable of. And I've gained a lot from just watching the crowds in these hearings, and I'm deeply grateful for it. And I just want you to know that as you're looking and they're asking, is the United States still involved? Are they still watching out? Do they still care? Well, I tell you, all you have to do is listen closely to Joe Wilson, who's a very conservative Republican from South Carolina, who every day wears that pin from Ukraine. Just listen to him. And he's not losing his seat because he supports Ukraine. He's not losing his seat because he supports these countries, the Baltics, the Nordics, those who understand what tyranny is like. He's going to be around here for a long time. So am I, so is Mark Vesey, and we all work together. So don't buy into the narrative of what you see on the media, because it's not news. It is a narrative. So I tell you what, when I go to Lithuania and I go to Vilnius, the wonderful, happy people there, they're fantastic. They're joyous. They sing once a year in a group of 10,000. It's a remarkable thing to hear. Mention Russia and watch what happens. You're not afraid of Russia. You're not afraid of China. You, Israel, Ukraine, the leaders of the free world right now, because you're willing to fight for what you believe in. And lastly, I'll just say, all is not dark. The horizon is bright because the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And I think right now we're rapidly bending towards justice because we understand. All of our heads are out of the sand. And we're all united in that one belief that good must survive over evil. And I love associating with good people like Mark and you here on our panel. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here and attending and spending some time with us today. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.